Welcome to the Simple Minds podcast, where we look to empower and encourage real conversation amongst men everywhere by unpacking topics on self-help, philosophy, and business.
Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of the Simple Minds podcast. Jacob here hosting today. I'm here today with Justin.
Sup?
Matt.
Hi.
And Conrad.
G'day. We just listened to 20 minutes of you practicing your radio voice and then you come out like a Muppet. Hi.
And practicing my radio voice.
Hi, this is Matt Hannon.
You mean I was talking into the
sausages.
microphone? Oh, Jesus. Mate. What do you spend your time thinking about?
Today we're missing Travis as well.
Are we missing him?
I'm not.
Physically.
Are you missing him physically? Jesus Christ.
Do you want to retort on whether you believe he's a nappy changer?
Retort.
Who? Me?
Hato.
Oh, Hato.
Yeah, because you were here and you copped it a couple of episodes back about whether you change nappies or not. Apparently you do.
Yeah, well, no. Apparently I do. Look, I do change some nappies.
You reckon Travis does? I think he does.
Yeah,
He's a bit
absolutely.
snaggier than you.
absolutely.
Yeah, no, he's definitely more earth than I am.
Yeah. It's funny though, right, how earthy he is, but they use disposable nappies.
Mate,
Isn't that fucked up? Isn't that some sort of contradiction?
Everybody uses disposable
Reusable
I
nappies.
didn't.
nappies
I
are a
didn't.
pain
Yeah,
in
but
the ass.
you're in a different decade, son. You're using like banana leaves or something.
Banana leaves.
Should we get started?
Yeah,
Probably
eventually.
a good idea.
It's taken us way too long to get to here.
Okay.
I'm thirsty.
Can we just like genuinely restart that?
No.
I reckon it's good.
Okay. We'll get into it then. The drink I brought today is, well, first of all, topic, talking virility. It's a kind of word that has gone out of fashion a little bit. I've got a bit of a chart of...
I talk about it a lot.
Genuinely?
No.
Don't play poker, Jacob.
It's a word that's use peaked in about the 1915 to 1925 range. So kind of
Really?
World War One, post World War One sort of era, and since then has just been declining in use. And at the same time, the term masculinity has pretty much risen kind of in use. More or less the words have become synonymous and have more or less swapped out in the last probably 100 years or so. However, in their origins, there are two different definitions. There's two different ideas, and that's something I kind of want to explore today. Primarily looking at masculinity as something that's ingrained in us, as men especially. The idea of toxic masculinity as a negative expression of masculine traits, and the idea that originally virility was the expression of masculinity in a positive way, and kind of what are aspects of masculinity that men should aspire towards, as well as aspects that we should try and kind of leave in the past. The drink I brought today, I sort of had a look through the liquor store and thought, what is the most masculine and manly drink I could get that kind of represents a gentleman? That's the least, I guess, toxic drink I could get. I found a Tanqueray gin and tonic, which says the definitive gin and tonic from London. And it kind of reminded me a little bit of something that like James Bond or a gentleman would drink. So I thought this would be
It's my standard.
your standard.
But can I give you some advice on it?
Gentleman's drink, a G&T.
Let me just tell you that the Tanqueray type of gin is the preferred gin by the Queen, so maybe she's got some masculine aspects towards her.
Oh, it's good to hear. Well, it is straight out of London, see shit. So is Liz, so makes sense.
Queen Lizzie. We were just starting to trend in the UK.
Now we've respectfully been removed.
Can't be doing any worse than Boris is at the moment.
But when I say the word virility, what comes to mind first for you guys?
Definitely G&T.
That's good. Job done.
I mean, are you serious? Like, I'm not. I wouldn't suggest I'm knowledgeable in this topic, but is this what you would consider the most masculine drink you could find in the bottle shop?
Well,
Masculine from the perspective of like a gentleman rather than like a bro. Like there were plenty of like Bundaberg and cola drinks that are like you could consider masculine, but
You didn't consider like an 18-year-old whiskey.
I considered that too, but it didn't fit the budget.
Okay, so here's where we're going. No, I have no problem with the drink. I just never considered
He's
that.
not wrong though. It's a clean drink. I mean, I probably wouldn't assumed it to be a gentleman's drink. However, I do drink it.
So do I.
somebody- Implying.
But James Bond didn't drink it. James Bond drank
Yeah,
martinis.
if you wanted to
Oh,
make
of
it a shaken, not stirred martini.
To make a martini, I would have had to have bought 3 or 4 bottles of
Thank you.
spirits in.
We could have brought Marco in. Probably not busy at the moment.
Hi, Marco.
I don't need vermouth in on my shelf.
Who does?
Or someone who drinks martinis.
Anyway, back to the word.
Are we dropping some cucumber in this just to make it more masculine?
No, that's what you do with Hendrix, mate.
So back to the original question. What does the word virility kind of bring to mind straight away for you guys?
Real straight of mind stuff without going to the dictionaries. Virility to me is the more sensual side. That's what the vision I get from a
Or sexual?
sensual, not sexual.
Okay. I was clarifying.
English is a second language of mine, so don't make fun of me.
I wasn't making fun of you. I was curious if you meant sensual in a sexual or a slightly different approach, however you would like to
Just
put that.
Sensual.
Justin, what comes to mind?
Google.
Google's, that's your generation, bro.
No, he didn't know what the word was.
I didn't know what the word
Oh,
was.
that's right.
I was like, what the fuck is being virile? I'm like, what?
Sounded like a sandwich to you.
Yeah, it's like going viral. I'm like, huh? I legit had to Google it because I've not been familiar with this word. So
Well, I think that's most of the population since 1925 by the
it's,
sound of it.
it's been dropping off. So you're clearly from the
That's fair.
1930s.
Excellent choice of long tail keyword.
Absolutely. Okay, and Matt, what came to mind for you first?
Probably similar to Conrad's line, but probably actually more, when I hear that word, I consider that more down the sexual or sensual path than masculinity. So I don't.
Is it more? Would it be? I mean, I know you say sexual, but would it be more the fact of the reproductive side of sexuality?
Yeah, that's right. Definitely the reproductive,
copulation
like,
side. Have to Google that word, too, Justin.
evolutionary, like that kind of
That's
side
nice.
of and reproductory, as opposed to like sex for sex's sake.
And
But
I actually, because I wondered what you were going to say, because given the fact that you've just become a father again, that to me was probably where I was leaning on with it, where you'd take the meaning of the word.
From a biological standpoint, virility is kind of the masculine version of fertility, which is traditionally associated with women.
yeah, being capable of.
A virile man is someone who's highly fertile, can reproduce, is a
Matt's
successful
the most
lover,
virile man in this room at the moment.
and I am the
3
least.
kids, you're the second. You got 2. Oh, he's the least. He's
That's
got
true.
none.
I'm the most sterile
Just
man in the group.
pointing
though.
at Justin Bourne.
He's the most sterile.
Doesn't even know the word. No wonder he hasn't got a child.
Hasn't stopped anyone else.
But there was a great article I linked up for us to kind of read and consider that talked about the ancient origins of virility. Back in the Roman days, the Greek days, a lot of these men in the, I think, circa sort of 300 BC era, a lot of the philosophers, for example, they talked of virility as this idea of masculine traits expressed in a positive way. They thought that all boys and then men are born masculine. It's not something you really earn. It's just something that you have. However, the difference is of someone who expresses virilitas, as they called it in the Greek or Latin, I think it is, is someone who expresses things like physicality, sexuality, but also intellect, control of your emotions. It was the idea that masculinity can be expressed in a negative way or in a positive way. It's not something that in itself is inherently bad or good. It's sort of neutral. There's a lot of talk nowadays about toxic masculinity and the expression of masculine traits to the detriment of men and society. Especially ideas of men that are pleasure-seeking, kind of mine is bigger than yours attitude. The person who comes to mind for a lot of people is Donald Trump.
But the mine is bigger than yours scenario. Wouldn't that be more the masculine, not that's the aspect of what that's defining as opposed to the virile aspect of that?
Oh yeah, I'm talking about toxic masculinity. So the left-hand side column here is things like being aggressive, undisciplined, boastful, selfish, weak, unmotivated, things, kind of expressions of masculinity, but in a negative way. Whereas the opposite of that is being vigorous but deliberate, courageous but restrained. It's this idea of self-control that if you combine the ingrained masculinity with the stoic practices they had in the day, that's that combination you're looking for. Men that are strong and physical and have the capacity and capability to perform, but also the control and restraint to not relinquish their emotion, or to kind of allow them emotions and their passions to consume them. The idea that you're a strong and kind of having high sexual energy, but also you're not, you're restrained in that as well. Like someone who is an adulterer, someone who sleeps with many women, who's undiscerning, is someone who's they did not consider to be virile. The idea of kind of being able to fight without getting angry, be heard without shouting, having control of your mind and body. That's this idea that you're not born with these traits, they're things you pursue. And the big question is, whilst the word has gone out of popularity and context in, 21st century society, are there aspects that they spoke about and they considered back then that are still worthy of pursuit?
So do you think someone a couple of thousand years ago in Greece had a write on a tablet, toxic virility, and shared that with everyone? I mean, are we just interchanging the words now in the sense, because I look at some of these names, for example, or even some of what we're calling negative now and maybe positive, and we're almost saying that in the past, potentially it was somewhat more positive. But the truth is all these things and more were happening back then. If anything, they were potentially slightly more accepted within society.
Well, I was going to say, I'm not a scholar, but I have taken an interest in the Roman Empire. Marcus Aurelius and Maximus. Interesting, you say positive, but from a practice perspective, they were womanizers.
Yes, and the idea of a womanizer is a very interesting one to debate, because if you look at someone like James Bond, he's considered to be a womanizer, and you can see that as a positive or a negative.
But James Bond has never had a wife, whereas Maximus and Aurelius had wives.
Yeah, so that's probably one aspect where they let themselves down, and in that era, that would have detracted from their virility.
So, can't a man, given the fact that virility talks about the positive nature of masculinity, can't a man be virile but also demonstrate toxic masculine traits?
Oh, absolutely. It's not a black and white thing. In the same way that not all masculinity is toxic and not all toxic behaviors are linked to masculinity, there's plenty of grey areas. I think that's where people go wrong with the current term. And I've got a little chart showing the popularity of the term toxic masculinity. Really, since about 1980, it was not even on the radar before that.
And what about masculinity?
Masculinity in itself is pretty much in the last 100 years has been trending up.
Yep.
In the opposite direction of virility.
So you could assume that there's been an interchange of words and potential meanings. However, there are positive and negative attributes to both sides of that equation.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's an aspect thing. It's not a definitive person thing.
Of course, yeah.
So you could be Marcus Aurelius and show some positive virile behaviours and traits, but also demonstrate some traits of toxicity.
Oh, 100%. It's in that no one person.
I'm him.
No one person is perfect.
I'm not one way or the other. I do both.
Oh, yeah.
You go both ways?
Both ways. Like this microphone.
Yeah. It's the idea that no one's perfect and it's something to aspire to, but in the same way,
I'm confused, man. Wait, hey, did you write this article or is this someone else's article?
Someone else's article, but these
Put
are
So,
that other
okay, the bit that I'm confused, but yeah, why is toxic masculinity? Okay, I'm cool with it being negative. You know, toxic masculinity is negative. How is then masculinity neutral for then virility to be positive?
Okay, because we're talking traits here, right? And we're talking about characteristic traits. We're talking about gender. Okay, so masculine is the gender base. Okay, and the negative attribute of that gender base is toxic masculinity. The positive nature of that gender base is virility.
correct.
Is it?
That's what we're writing here. I mean, that's what the word is. So if we're going to bring toxic masculinity in play, we're going to have to bookend it with the other alternative, right? You just can't be masculine. That's gender based. Okay, so the aspect of the good aspects of, or the positive aspects of being masculine is being virile.
Yeah. Each characteristic can be expressed either way. Something like being physical, for example. So physicality is typically considered to be a masculine trait. Expressed in a negative way as someone who has, say, a temper or goes out bars pursuing fights, people who are violent. That is a negative or a toxic expression of physicality as a masculine trait. Someone who can...
But in ancient Rome, that was okay.
Yeah.
It was. I mean, that's because they talk about virility. Virile means marked by strength or force. So Roman empires, Roman emperors were all about force. That's how they acquired their land.
Oh, yes, but they also talked about restraint and control of temper and like the whole Stoic concept.
They all killed each other, mate. Each Roman emperor rose to power through fucking killing someone. How's that?
Virile.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's probably
Toxic virility. For me.
I
told you someone wrote it on a business on
I'm
a
not
slate.
saying so. Let's not get stoicism mixed up with virility, right? Because that's very different again. I can understand. Characterizing Marcus Aurelius as virile, by the definition of the word marked by strength or force, completely agree. Completely agree. Okay. However, he was a womanizer, and he did kill with his own hands, not just his armies.
Yes.
So, moving away, going back to Klein and Matt. So, is virility something that we should be looking to pursue as men? I mean, what do we?
Yeah, good question.
Is that kind of like because virility's an interest? Yeah, I've never heard of the word.
Standing in your
until
strength,
today.
100%.
I've started listening to The Way of the Superior Man.
Yeah, so that's virile. That's
and
what
so a
you're
lot of
reading.
that. I'm only probably 1/3 of the way through, but
Yep.
some of the concepts that have started to be brought
Standing
up,
in your strength, representing your power, and using it positively.
really resonate a lot with some of this, what you've currently defined here in the virility column. So is that something men should be aspiring towards, and should we be working towards? Is that kind of...
Yeah, it's this idea that we, as men, we are born with, and not all, lumping all men into this, but generally masculinity has all these traits and attributes that are traditionally, I guess, characterized or attributed to men, and we can use them in a positive way or we can use them in a negative way. And the positive way to use them is to, like an athlete, for example, who uses their physical attributes to benefit, but with restraint. Someone who,
The problem with that, though, right, and it's all hormonal based, the problem with that, it does trigger the flip side of what you would call toxic masculinity. Because an overdose of the masculine hormones causes that power play that can walk that fine line and flip to the other side.
yeah, a good example of this is something like martial arts, where the idea that you learn to control your physical, like your strength, and control that self-discipline. A good way to...
Yeah, control and direct.
Yeah, in that you learn to control your aggression, not to squash it, but not to let it out, to control that emotion. So whether it be karate or jiu-jitsu or any of these sort of forms of martial art, you learn here's how to use your strength in a positive way to defend, not to use it to, I guess, to kill and destroy. And that's like a good example of, I guess, where the Romans back then probably
They all did it, mate. The Chinese, the Japanese, everyone did it.
anyone in that they've let their emotions drive and control them, and they've used that masculinity in a negative way.
So, coming back to the point you made, Justin, about what you're reading, The Way of the Superior Man, and how we can come back to owning our virility, it is using your power and directed towards good. And right now, when we joked about it earlier with Trav, and Trav's not, Trav's a bloke. We're seeing today more so than ever, probably a lot of men stepping away from their power because they're too scared to be defined by the word masculine because of the association to the toxicity, not to the association of the word of virility. I think that's the problem we've got. And by bringing back the word in some sort of force, then we can give men an opportunity to stand for what they want to stand for and use their power and their strength towards good. The more we use that and the more we repeg that, I think as a society and as a gender, we can become powerful and be able to stand up to our women who are becoming powerful.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you frame it that way.
I thought it was fucking amazing, frankly.
Because, obviously, when you define masculine and I guess the word masculine and a lot of the traits that go with it have copped a lot of bad PR over the last probably, quite a few years. And us as younger men on this side, we're all young men here, are used to that bad PR. And so there's not really a North Star to kind of look towards other than just bracketing being a good human. But, listening to The Way of Superior Man and respecting and understanding masculine energy and feminine energy, there's obviously been a huge shift and attention on the feminine, and that's been amazing. And it's great to see. But in the process, there has been almost a loss of way and no leadership in the masculine area, and I think the word's been tainted a little bit.
Well, the word's been lost.
Yeah. Well, it's been
It's got an
increased.
adjective in front of it. And basically, that's all it is, right?
Virility has been lost, and
But also masculinity.
Yeah.
Like when you just say it, it almost balances on the negative.
Correct.
Without-
That's exactly right.
And that's
But it
where I
shouldn't.
like.
There should either be another, adjective
It's
in
a
front
neutral
of it.
word.
Yeah.
It just defines the gender.
But there's a toxic just by saying the word, it feels heavy for already. So like I like where you're going with that is if we could swing the conversation to virility, and it's quite of a softer and to me, just sitting here, virility speaks to love a hell of a lot more.
Yeah, it embodies that sensual side of a man.
Yeah, I get a strong feeling of more of love and give while being powerful and masculine.
But that is power, right? I
Yeah.
mean, because they do talk about the way to true strength is through inner love. So it is a path to power.
And I think the word masculine, for some reason, or even with my exposure and through my experiences growing up, love doesn't really seem to associate with the word masculine, or for me it hasn't. And I think that's probably common amongst men. And so it's because it's all about rah-rah and, whereas, so that's super fascinating.
Men don't cry, boys don't cry sort of thing. Whereas virility kind of speaks to a man who can give his young son or daughter a hug and use that physicality and that strength and that sheltering ability to
create
provide
comfort.
safety and comfort.
And that's where you can transcend, right? Because someone asked me the other day about this podcast, and they couldn't understand how we could come on and talk about the things that we talk about. And I guess you could see what they were saying is that they feel like they were giving up some form of like ammunition or weakness.
It was a male that spoke to you.
It was a female, but it was a female in a business conversation where she was very much in a masculine state of like the conversation, but she couldn't understand how I would give up that, I guess, ammunition, not realizing that actually for me, and I'm sure that you guys are the same, it's more or less the opposite. The more I put it out there, it's just something you can't use against me. And it's something that I'm able to transcend, and I have enough strength to say, well, I can open that door into that vulnerability or
I
into
can
that
talk about it.
or into that sort of virility piece. I can open that door and be in control of it and talk about it rather than it be something that I have to hide in the cupboard.
But that is true strength.
And that's strength.
Yeah. Yeah, a virile man is strong enough to be vulnerable and say, like, I am strong enough and I'm confident enough in who I am to share these things and not fear what's going to happen and not...
You know what? I think it'd be interesting to see the word toxic masculinity overlaid from a use perspective in line with machoism. Because that's a lot of the stuff that is being called toxic these days. Back in the 60s and 70s, well, no, I wasn't around the 60s, but what you can see on the TV, you know...
Were you overseas or something?
I was swimming.
You're swimming.
You know, back in those days where you see the likes of, and you guys will laugh at this if you remember it, but...
Brady Bunch?
Not necessarily the Brady Bunch, but someone like Arthur Fonzarelli off Happy Days, the Fonz, you know, he was very macho. And, you know, you would almost say the way that, again, the way he treated women was probably on the other side of good.
Yeah.
Yeah, like what is a T-Bird from Greece? Is that
Yeah,
toxic
but
masculinity?
That's a great movie, apparently, right?
You guys, have you seen it?
So I think
you haven't.
I think it's really challenging, but the challenge is there for us males to try to embrace that word more. And I'm not saying we're going to be able to create a resurgence, but when talking to men around you, sons, you know, I coach basketball teams. It's to encourage the fact that to stay in their power, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, not to be afraid of traits of masculinity and also not to be afraid of traits of femininity. That I think the biggest thing that's come out of the last few decades is this battle between them, this idea that they're in a tug of war rather than something that should be combined. That there was, for so long, for thousands of years, there was this idea that men dominated and masculine dominated feminine and men were the greater species. And then over the last 20, 30 years or so, that's started to, or more, that's reversed to a point where even talking about being masculine is now becoming something that it's a word that has negative connotations around it. It's a word that's now starting to get a lot of bad bad.
Yeah, the other one would
press
be
around
toxic femininity. See whether that's floating around at the moment.
Yeah, Google that. But no, look, I agree. I
Start
think
that trend.
I think it's a dangerous, like it's a slippery slope if we start to always consider like all elements of masculinity a negative thing. I mean,
Yeah.
if our children start to bring that through,
But I think that's where it was going, right?
and look, I know a lot of men who are very, they may show elements of masculinity in some of their workplaces, but are incredibly feminine in their relationship, and that's okay. But
That's
I think
not me.
it's not me, but it's also considered.
The way you said hello when you got on this show, man, I'm considering that might be you. Hi.
That was just my impersonation of Oh, never mind. I won't out you in public. I just think it's a real problem, and I know people that if it's seen as negative, and we keep showing this to the younger generations that it's a problem, then we won't have there will be no healthy. What there will be is only toxic.
Yeah, but I'm glad because now we've brought that word back in play.
Well, if we bring virility back in play, that's great if that works. But what I'm saying is, like, if we only talk to the negative of it, there will only ever be negative. So what you'll find men or people will be doing is they'll be in a fairly neutral state, or they do something and it's toxic, and so we'll lose the whole positive aspect of it, which is a real danger because it is what we bring to the to the table as a species.
Yeah, 100%.
I'm good.
You're good. It's super interesting. It's not talked enough. It's not talked about enough. Particularly listening to the way of the superior man, respecting
Author.
of the way of the
David Dieter.
Yeah.
that's
Shout out, David.
yeah,
Great
that's
book.
been really good to understand and respect both sides. And it's interesting in that book. He talks about how a lot of women these days are actually complaining because their men aren't masculine enough.
Yeah, but there's a whole other social thing
Which is
going on at the
interesting
moment,
in
mate. And I've been talking to a few women about this recently over the last few weeks. the rise in the power of females is on the table. That women have not changed their initiation into womanhood. All right, so they hit puberty at roughly the same age as they have over the last thousands of years, and a girl becomes a woman. Men don't have a definitive initiation.
Some
point.
never get there.
Yeah, some never get there. It's said that men don't mature emotionally until somewhere in their 30s, north of 32. And so you've got a massive imbalance of women that are prepared to parent at 10, 11 years of age from a physiology perspective, and men that aren't ready to parent until in their 30s. So what ends up happening, and what's happening at the moment, and this is probably something that was always happening, but the population bias and the media has now made us more aware that more women are dating younger men, and largely because they've got maternal instincts and they want to parent. So they end up parenting their partners. That's what's happened. And that's why you're seeing divorce rates go through, because when men start to balance out, they know they don't need another mother, and then they start to rebel. I've just solved the problem.
But if you were a Virile Man,
Francis.com.
yeah,
Hate mail.
copy and paste. Would that mitigate that?
Being virile means that you stand in your strength.
Yep.
Okay. Doesn't mean you dominate. It doesn't mean that you're asserting but you are asserting yourself in your presence, not in your physicality. Does that make sense?
It's true.
Okay. And which means that you can bring yourself to the half of a relationship and not impose yourself over the relationship. Okay, but what you're also doing is inviting that other person to bring their other half of the relationship and not impose their self over you.
It's like people who speak over others to be heard by yelling or being louder.
What?
That's them.
Like this podcast.
That's them using, I guess,
That's a great example.
masculinity, or they're just being louder rather than listening, using.
Just like that.
Just like that, taking the opportunity to listen and have their voice heard in a kind of constructive way.
I think great topic, mate.
Yeah,
I think it's a great topic. I mean, I for one, I was very aware of that word, but understanding the polarity between where it has been and where it is, and what we have interchanged it with is really interesting.
Yeah, and the idea of the sexual aspect of it is a huge one, in that the bro culture and the Tinder culture that's around nowadays, of that idea that men, especially young men and boys,
it's all playing to the immaturity of man, mate. That's what it is. It's all playing
just
to.
want to get
it's
out
playing
there
to the immaturity of the
and find a
man
girl
and the maturity of a female. That's what it's doing, and it's working.
Yeah,
It's working.
and you could even look at this and go, well, toxic masculinity is the men that go out there looking for one-night stands, or especially one-night stands where they're purely looking for that sexual gratification, and perhaps the woman is looking for something else. They're taking advantage.
I don't know whether that's toxic, though. This is where I'll draw the line on it. I don't believe one-night stands defines toxic masculinity.
Not if you leave it there. It's based on the context of the individual experience.
Yeah, I don't
I think it's the intent. I think it's the intention.
Really?
Yeah, in that, like, if you go into
If both consenting adults are going home for the night,
if it's purely they're both
Why isn't
consenting
that
and
toxic femininity then? If on
Yeah,
her
100%.
behalf, like, what's the unless if the guy's tricked them into something?
exactly right. If there's been some
if
level
there's
of manipulation,
that idea,
Yeah.
of womanizing, like, I'm not sure if you guys ever watched that show, How I Met Your Mother, but Barney Stinson, one of the main characters, was a serial womanizer. He'd play tricks, he'd seduce women at the bar, he'd take them home, and then he'd never call them again.
yeah, but
I'll
go out on a limb here, and I will go out on a limb, but there is a bit of play that happens between. There's byplay that happens between men and women, and some women do like that. I'm not saying they like the banter, they like the byplay, they like the bloke being forward and coming up to them. I flip that around. I do know there's a lot of women that do the other side now too. I'm very aware of that. But, I guess it does really come down to the seed of intent. I'm not brave enough to turn around and say that womanising is defined as one night stands and that's all bad, and you can't drop lines and you can't try to influence. I mean, fuck's sake, it is influencing.
What you're talking about there is manipulation, which is manipulation however you want to, it doesn't really matter, does it? Like it's
the negative intent is manipulation.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you can call it influence, and I prefer to call it influence because I know both consenting adults, unless you're dropping a drug on someone, a woman will say yes to come home with you if you've impressed them.
Yeah.
That doesn't make you a toxic male.
What you do next defines that.
Oh, no.
I don't know about that.
No.
I don't think that's not toxicity in
The
itself.
act of sleeping with women does not make you a toxic male.
No, I think that bit is okay. It's if you sneak out the next morning when she was expecting to have a
Fair enough.
conversation and continue that.
Fair enough.
And you're like, no,
I think if you disrespect, just as with anything, if there's just disrespect there,
exactly. That's the word.
then it's toxic. I think if it's done respectfully, because the funny thing,
Cyrano de Bergerac,
'cause the funny thing
James
is-
Bond. These guys are all seem to be acceptable males. You said at the start, you put him in the positive.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, he disappears and sends a bottle of champagne.
I'm not sure on this fact, but I have read claims that women are actually more sexually, like blokes cop it a heat, think with their dicks, blah, blah, blah. There is stuff that women are actually more sexually kind of active and
Promiscuous.
promiscuous than males.
Yep. And they are talking about it in the workplace more often than not these days.
as a collective. And yet
Water cooler conversations.
Yeah. And then we guys cop it for thinking with, which is super interesting.
Yeah. Toxic.
Yeah. I'm a male fan.
Are you?
I'm very pro male.
Yeah, but if you talk about toxic femininity, you're going to get slammed.
I'd love to talk about that topic. Love to.
Go on then.
Not
Yeah,
today.
the mic's on.
I'll bring up another topic, but I'd love to bring the stats to the table because there are real numbers out there.
There would be an equivalent of this where you have traditional aspects of femininity that women are kind of, I guess, born with. There'd be ways that they use that in a negative way and ways that they
Yeah,
can
100%.
use it,
Exactly
like,
the
Yeah.
same.
nurturing.
So it's not,
I've been manipulated.
But I think the common thing is the immaturity
disrespected.
piece, as you talked about. Like most guys are more immature, which then causes probably more
But that's
opportunity.
biology and physiology.
More
It's not them. It
More
is what
opportunity
they are.
for disrespect to happen because of their immaturity.
exactly right.
And that leads to then the
And,
toxicity.
and you've got to be aware of that. And I mean, if we're not aware of that at the moment, then who the fuck are we? I mean, Jesus Christ. I mean, that stuff is not unknown. That is very easy information to figure out. Men do mature later than women. And if you don't know that right now, women, please listen.
And there's a really interesting example of this a few years back when, like, the army is a really good example of something that's been a fairly toxic masculine culture for quite some time in that.
But they've needed to be to a point, right? They've gone over the line because now we're coming out to virility, the strength and courage. To do what they do, they have to be virile.
Oh, 100%.
All right, it's the machoism or the toxicity where they've become that bro culture you talk about, which
Yeah.
has always been because they've got to live and die for their bros, man.
Yeah, they've had aspects of both. They've just, I guess, over time confused standing, like,
It's got a bit messy.
being willing to die for your mates around you, and then also playing up that kind of the misogyny, I guess, is a big aspect of it, is that the disrespect for women that came out of it. But a few years ago, the chief of army, there was just 2 or 3 incidents where female cadets were slept with on during their officer training, whether it be stories or images or things came out of it. And the chief of army said, nope, I'm having a zero tolerance on this. This isn't the army that I want to be a part of. He was kind of going, the masculinity in this current culture is being pushed in a toxic way, and there are things that I'm not happy with. So I'm going to push it back the other way. And the 3 original army values were courage, courage, initiative, and teamwork. And he added a 4th one, respect, which
that's fair.
which you think probably should be a given. But he said, no, I'm standing up for this. We want more women in the army. We want that femininity to add value and to bring out positivity.
But you've got to respect each other, even as men, right?
100%.
Respect your opponent. You've got to respect the culture of the land you're having your combat on. I mean, because what we know about armies and battles is that a lot of that stuff plays out.
Yeah,
Disrespect of everything.
and respecting human life to a degree as well.
Oh, for sure.
I know stories of World War II where they'd have breaks from fighting and they'd come across the line and have a drink or have a kick of a ball or whatever. And
Wouldn't happen today.
it certainly doesn't happen today. You wouldn't have Al-Qaeda going, yeah, cool, let's have a break and we'll come over and feed you some baklava.
We do have to beep out that word.
What did he say? I don't think he said anything, did he?
What?
He said something about Al.
Al Gore.
Oh, God.
Yours to wrap up, bro.
Yes. I'd love to know what other listeners, male and female, what they thought before this podcast virility meant to them, whether like Justin, they had no idea what it meant, or perhaps they thought of it purely in a biological sense. Is it something that and we'll link up the article that goes into a lot more detail about
Some of these things.
the expression of it. It'd just be interesting to know
graphs.
what other aspects that men should kind of pursue and
Do it! Just do it! Don't let your dreams be dreams.
thank you, Matt.
That was well picked.
There was a great podcast, just on a segue.
Yelling to be heard.
There's a great podcast that had some beautiful musical overlays I listened to recently.
You're talking about the future.
The future
Christo.
with Errol Gerson.
Yeah.
It was a beautiful piece of podcasting.
Well, just so you know, that was that audio
Overlays
was
used
put
in
in.
a positive way, not in a toxic.
Look, that was all put in.
Whatever his name is, Christo.
That's post production, mate. This is live. Huh?
Show some restraint.
Very
man.
raw and live.
Yeah, show some restraint.
Some respect.
Well, right now, no one's going to know what you're talking about because I can cut that channel and that segment out, and you're just talking rubbish now.
There's just been an awkward pause.
That's called post-production.
We cut pauses out too, Jacob.
I don't know what goes on behind the scenes. I just come here, I speak occasionally.
He just said he just said he cut pause. The RSPCA going to be knocking on your door.
Hurry as PECT. Find out.
If you've got value from this, let us know. And
Love the GMT.
And if you didn't, let us know.
yeah,
too.
Yeah, it's fresh.
I have a
Cheers to Lizzie.
Cheers.
100 and how is she? 103?
Is she?
102?
No, she's
Well done, love.
a lot of bad luck in this room.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Goodbye.